Testing 1, 2. That mistake again. Okay, repeat of a message. So the test will be online and this weekend because I don't want to use up a time for class period to do the test. It will be online. It will be opened Friday morning at 12 a.m. if you want to get up in the morning and start till 11:59 Sunday night. Once it starts, you have 75 minutes to go in and go out, okay? I'll start having the videos loaded up tomorrow. Been in a real busyness. I've signed up 6 internships already today, so this is how the flow goes. So it will be chapter 7, 6, 7, 8, and then the bit of chapter 9 on Thursday. We'll talk about emerging technologies in marketing channels, and then we'll close it up, and then it'll be ready for the weekend. All right, so as I've said before, this is really one of my favorite subjects to talk about. Franchising, as I said before, is not necessarily unique to the United States, but it just seems to go along with what we find successful in the way that we do our particular business. We talked about on Thursday the startup package and what the startup package brings for you. It allows you, they will select a site for you. If a corporation like McDonald's, they'll even buy the site for you. Of course, that's also what they call the golden handcuffs. That's kind of their way of being able to keep you into the game. You own the building, they own the site. Wonderful arrangement. You have the brand name, which helps you to build a clientele that's already there. And then you have the enormous economies of scale that go along with the big shoulders of a corporation like McDonald's. So along with that, one of the key points, and this is certainly going to be a test question, is that franchising is not a system for launching a business, but running a business. Remember that channels is always an iterative process. It is basically not an event, it is a process. And so franchising, hopefully, is a way with constant supervision, being able to monitor quality control problems and all of the other things that can occur while you're starting and growing your business, that they can help you along. They're not just a manufacturer who is out there spitting out goods for people to buy. They are actively trying to successfully build your business because that builds their own. Franchises are required to submit management reports monthly, semi-monthly, even weekly and daily about key moments of their operation, because the magic of analytics actually has been around for nearly 40 years. I worked for Radio Shack back in the 80s when it was the computer center. And every afternoon, we would actually turn in our reports on a 300 baud modem. It would take like 15 minutes to transfer over traditional telephone lines, but all that information would be sent to Fort Worth, where Radio Shack corporate was. That information would hit their computer systems. All of that massive data would be translated into analytics of that time and be able, hopefully, to predict errors or problems where they occur in the future. Just think of what 40 years of analytics has been able to do for that efficiency. It means that a corporation such as McDonald's, as it gets these thousands of reports in every day, that they can look at your particular business at this particular point in your growth and anticipate what they think are problems and hopefully help you to cut them off. The franchisor offers feedback to assist the franchisee to achieve some success. It also helps for them to judge the franchisee, especially when it comes to rewards. Who are the successful ones? And if they're successful, what are they doing that might be particularly unique to the area that they're in? And so these are the things that keep franchisers together. They, in essence, act as if they tend to be a warehouser, or let's just say a larger piece of the corporation, and they're there to help monitor, to help achieve a success. So the two things that manufacturers have, size and scope, whereas a manufacturer, once again, they do have their own reasons for being, they have their own spreadsheets and their own objectives, just like a manager would, or a franchisor and a manufacturer would. They act in a different manner because they consolidate the channels into an economic scale, but directly focused on sending that success down to their providers below. It means that when the manufacturer or the franchisor works on things, it's not merely to achieve their own success. Not only that, but they are built to intimately understand what their downstream partners are doing because they're in the same business. And so that's what the synergy part means. If you remember when we talked about the wholesalers, a wholesaler like Moody Price is a collector of those pieces, but they may have a different reason for doing their jobs than the manufacturers do. That doesn't happen with a franchisor. Everybody is in one mind. And by focusing also the manufacturer on one product line, the franchisor, you can get benefits from that specialization. It means that you can focus on a branded concept, which means that you achieve passing down this narrow line of success that they built and hopefully can attain and achieve and keep moving in the right direction. I feel like Starbucks has gotten off the rails a little bit because they've decided to be something other than somewhat of a traditional coffee shop. They tend to now go into product lines that were not necessarily the ones that they needed, but also the difficulty is that they've broadened their base somewhat. And I think that that's not always a good thing. And it's when you do those kind of things, when you get off of your rails, unless you have a valid reason why, sometimes you can lose your way a bit. But because you do focus on one brand, and the franchisees are the McDonald's here and the McDonald's there, are basically built in geographic areas in which they own, you prevent what's known as free riding. So free riding, as we've talked about before, is when the consumer goes to one person that they know has a pretty adept knowledge about what they're speaking of. They come and pump me for information, and they go somewhere else to find a cheaper price. That doesn't happen in a franchise. I don't bear all the costs, and the other side doesn't bear all the benefit. Because also the franchisor has big shoulders, they demand and expect certain levels of quality, And there's the expectation for towing that line. It guarantees consistency. It means that the McDonald's in one place is pretty much guaranteed to be like McDonald's in another place. So one of the real great franchises is hotels and motels. It's amazing the capital cost that it takes to really build one of those. And Ramadas and Holiday Inns, if you went into a Ramada and Holiday Inn back in the 70s and 80s, the exact same format. In other words, if I went into a Holiday Inn in Spokane, Washington, it would be like the same Holiday Inn in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. They would be exactly the same. There used to be a saying, the best surprise is no surprise. Well, they add a little flexibility now, but the consistency brought a value to the consumer. The expectation is that if I got good quality in Washington, I would expect to get good quality in Fort Lauderdale, and they got it, all right? That enhances the brand equity. That is another reason why franchises are very valuable. When you think about Subway has something to the effect of 28,000 franchises in the United States. And yet, when you go into a Subway in Boone, you expect the same kind of quality or whatever the expectation is as a Subway somewhere else. That's what a franchise does, or hopefully does, is it creates a competitive advantages, is that everybody is moving in the same direction with some degree of flexibilities. They can do things better. So what does the franchisor get back? What does the franchisor be able to do with all of these franchisees that they give down? They are, in essence, giving away intellectual properties. They're allowing these places to be able to grow on your name. So what do they get back? If I were, as I've talked about it before, a comeback shack, and I were thinking to grow beyond the 4 locations they have now, and I were to make the choice that I want a franchise, I want to go find a good lawyer, because franchising law is unique unto itself. Just a regular G lawyer doesn't help. What franchising would do for them is that if they don't have, the capital to grow, the franchising would give it to them. So I want to expand to 150 locations in the United States, or let's say in North Carolina. I want to do it in the shape of 2.5 years. Collectively, that could be anywhere from $50 to $85 million. How is that possible? Well, not only that, but I got such a good idea that I'm afraid somebody's going to come along and take that idea, because in the world of business, I know a good idea when I steal one. So what if they were to come along and do the same things, the same rollback, the same way they do all of those things? How do I do it first? Well, franchising gives me a first mover advantage in that I can amortize those costs to a larger operation and move fast. I can find franchisees to make willing investments, to have the sufficient financial resources. In essence, the franchisees become purchasers of stock in my corporation. And for that purchases that they give me as a franchisor, I give them the right to be my representative within a certain geographic location. As a franchisee, if I'm collecting a wealth of young talent, people that I want to be able to expand and go out, maybe these individuals who are in my corporation, maybe they don't want to work for a boss, maybe they want to be a boss themselves. What being a franchisor means is that the applicants within my group, I can give them the chance to be franchisees. So I bring them into my corporation, they learn about this, they say, you know, I've always wanted to do this as a business. Before you know it, they've launched out, they've become franchisees, and now all of a sudden, They are harnessing the entrepreneurial spirit of those individuals. They feel the pride of ownership. They feel that sense of loyalty towards the franchise system, which gave them a chance they could have never achieved by themselves, quite simply because they've had the dream, but not the money. And so now you have an excellent pathway. You have actually a pathway that grows in both directions. Those within corporate who have that desire to go out and reach for that have a way downward in which they can become independent operators. The franchisees who have unique individuals who are working for their companies who dream of working for a corporate operation, they have a pathway into a bigger dream as well. As I said before, the CEO of McDonald's from 2006 to 2012 came from a hamburger university. They started out as a burger flipper and they moved all the way to CEO. It's a great pathway to success if you're willing to do it. It requires effort, it requires hard work, but then again, what doesn't? Not only that, but the franchisees become a vision to local circumstances, and performance ambiguity is no longer a problem. And so they know from the boots on the ground where there are good things that they may take advantage of and where there are bad ones. So the fish sandwich, I'm not sure if I talked about this before, but the fish sandwich actually came from Louisiana. So in Louisiana, which has a traditionally Catholic heritage, their basic days are built around the heritage of that time, even though, of course, they're secular now. But one of the things that they go through is after Mardi Gras is the 40 days of Lent. On a Friday, traditionally in Louisiana, there is the restriction of meat. You don't eat meat on a Friday, but fish is fine. And so what you find is this is where you normally see on a Friday night, most of the places having fish specials. If they're having church socials on a Friday, the fish fries are guaranteed. Even though it's a secular environment, that's where traditions and heritage come from. So anyway, one of the McDonald's thought it was a great idea is instead of where they always had this low on a Friday between the 40 days of Lent, why don't we just make a fish sandwich? Worked out, and you know what? It actually tastes pretty good. Sent the idea to corporate McDonald's, and now everybody has a fish sandwich. That's where it came from because they understood the local circumstances, and now you can eat fish any day of the week. The McRib actually has kind of a unique heritage. You know, every once in a while, the McRib will come along. And one of the things about the McRib is they know that they release it for 6 weeks every year, generally, because they know you'll have one and it'll taste delicious and you never want another one for another year. And that just comes about by its nature, okay? So these are the benefits of the franchisor. You've got boots on the ground, you reduce performance ambiguity, you create this two-way conduit of being able to move valuable information up and down the chain. So this is an example. So there is is it a cultural thing and is it a general dislike? But there is, you know, statistical evidence that says that cheese is not eaten very much in Asian cultures. And one of the things that corporate Pizza Hut discouraged was corporate Pizza Hut did not want to invest in the Asian countries. Well, there was a guy by the name of Heineke who came along and said, yeah, but if I'm in Thailand and if I'm in Bangkok with 2 million people, isn't there the possibility that maybe a couple of hundred would like cheese? And Pizza Hut said, well, yeah, it's your dime, go right ahead. He opened the one in Thailand and it broke out everywhere. And so one of the things that this can do is it can allow someone else to go test the waters for you so that if they achieve success, you achieve it as well. So showing the example of another one. Let's see. Where am I? Excuse me for just a second. Sorry. Folks. Okay. I do not expect you to know who this guy is, but this is a gentleman by the name of Duncan Hines. Have you ever heard the name before? Okay. If you go into most supermarkets and you look under instant cakes, you will see most of the trade, or not most of them, but a lot of the trade logos are Duncan Hines. This man had nothing to do with cakes. However, what he did have was he was known as a symbol for quality, number one. So Duncan Hines was a business salesperson. He traveled with, he and his wife traveled everywhere. They were inseparable as a couple. And in the 30s, during the Depression, he would travel the back roads across the United States selling things. Now, I want you to realize or think of United States in the 30s during the depths of the Depression. Some of the things, you did not have franchises, you did not have Hiltons, you did not have McDonald's. You had local places basically that were there to provide local fare. And so if I was a salesperson traveling across the United States, I had no idea what was in the next city. But Duncan Hines did. What he would do is every city he would go through, he would write shorthand, he and his wife together, the things that they found out about that particular place. They would talk about the hotels that they went to, whether or not the hotels had a bathroom, because that was generally one of those things they had or not. Whether they also had lunches or dinners there, because generally they may not, where the best places were to stop to buy gas, where the best places to eat. He kept copious notes. And so one day they were at a cocktail party and they were looking at what he was doing. And his friends were saying, Duncan, this stuff is incredible. Why don't you put it into a book? And he did. He put it into two books. One of them is the Duncan Hines book of good eating and the Duncan Hines book of good places to stay. And so I do this on Mississippi, of course, living in Mississippi, but I want to go to the beginning of this. And this was his book called Lodging for the Night. Duncan Hines was the first great influencer in the United States. Every YouTube channel copies what he was doing, and he was using just a different medium, books. It was the same thing, folks. So just to show you this, some of the things, there's the man himself talking about lodging for the night. And so this is his story about how he went about it and how he went about collecting his works. And so some of the things, if we all know a good influencer doesn't take money from anyone else, because we know an influencer who does that is a shill, and they're just basically fronting some other company. He never took any money for it. No place listed has paid him for anything. There's no space on his thing to sell on. He was just an individual who believed in his own reputation. May we all be that way. So what are the things that he considered about lodging? Cleanliness always, quietness, comfortable beds, courteous, adequate, and unobtrusive service and hospitality. It's universal stuff, folks. It's what we would expect now as consumers. And so he put together this book, as I've said, it's Lodging for the Night and for Good Eating. And let me go back to here, go back to the page. So as I said, I'm showing Mississippi. Let me make sure that I am on the right share. Okay, let's see. Hopefully I'm sharing the right thing. So Biloxi is near where I grew up in Long Beach. at this time, it was a population of 25,000. And these are, the White House, by the way, is still there. That's an amazing thing. The Broadwater Beach was a magnificent hotel that was destroyed during Katrina. So Hotel the White House, opened December 24th to September 10th, because at that time you also had specific times of the year. You didn't have air conditioning, so you wanted to have places that were reasonable at time. Old hotel, this type that ensures return yearly, 114 rooms, main building, 54 cottages, mostly water and bath inside. That's what it means. For two people, it's $4 to $13. Pets permitted. And so these are the kinds of things that he would write about. It was an instant classic. As I said, he also did a guide for good eating as well. His name became so valuable that they came along and bought it to do something about instant cake recipes. Now here's it, going on a side note. The first instant cake mixes had everything you needed. All you had to do was add water. It was a miserable failure, okay? They took out the milk, they took out the butter, and they sold like hotcakes. And the reason why is that in the performance of cooking, you want to feel like you've cooked. So if you added the milk and you added the butter, there was the feeling of accomplishment that you cooked something, all right? Just unique marketing stuff. So one day, let's see, where is we? One day, he's going along by Corbin, Kentucky, and there's the place being run by an elderly gentleman. Actually, this was a truck stop. They allowed the elderly gentleman to live there for nothing if he provided a meal or provided a basic place for someone to get something to eat. He took his first Social Security check, I think he was 62 years old, used it to kind of finance the things that he wanted to put in there. And he worked himself literally to death for about 6 months, as he was one of only 3 other people there. So Duncan Hines, the man who quality is known by, it's his middle name, comes along and writes this little thing. Very nice place to stop en route through Cumberland Falls, continuous 140 service, sizzling steaks, fried chicken, country ham. That L means lunch was generally 50 cents, expenders to $1, and then dinners were 60 cents to $1. This exploded the amount of work that was going on to this, so much so that franchisers who were just starting up in the 50s sought this man out to see if they could franchise him. The guy scratched his head and said, well, that mean more work? And they said, no, actually less. And they said, yeah, I'll kind of go along with it. And that man was the named Harlan Sanders, otherwise known as Colonel Sanders, otherwise known as the man who started Kentucky Fried Chicken. He was known to be a hard person. He was consumed with his product. And the number one thing, 2 things, excuse me, that Harlan Sanders believed in more than anything else when it came to food was ingredients and the quality of the ingredients and cleanliness. They were the 2 things that he lived by, that he refused to compromise on. He was known, if you were a franchisee of him, you must invest in stainless steel cookware. You must clean those at a temperature of 200 degrees, in other words, right at the point of boiling. So you had to invest in special equipment to be able to clean them. He was known to pull franchises right as he came in. He was known as hot-tempered, but he was also known as the first real great franchiser in the United States. This gentleman came along and he helped with Harlan Sanders in another very special way. So Harlan Sanders was iconic basically in the things that he cooked because of just his face. I mean, you could look at his face and you could just see that, all right? So, excuse me, I always hate this. Oh, let's see. But this gentleman did was he came up with the iconic red and white building. He's the one that developed it. He's the one who put Colonel Sanders out in front. And so this individual is known in his way. One of the things he's known for is building the Colonel Sanders logo. He started at Colonel Sanders. He was an orphan. He started working at a KFC when he was 13 years old. He worked himself up to where he was 19 and became one of the first franchisers of Colonel Sanders. When he felt he was good enough, he decided he was going to create his own franchise, and he learned the lessons that Colonel Sanders taught him. One of them was the quality of ingredients, and the second was cleanliness. He wanted to make a hamburger joint, but do something unique. He never wanted to use frozen meat because frozen meat absorbs water. That also makes it not grill as well. And that gentleman's name was Dave Thomas, or the founder of Wendy's. Dave Thomas comes along, improves on the hamburger as we know it. If you were to go into Wendy's, my brother actually was one of the assistant manager for them for a while. If you were going into a Wendy's and they did not put the right amount of ketchup or pickles on it, I do not know how it is this time, but they would basically throw that in the trash and cook you a brand new one. That's how much they refuse to compromise. And so Wendy's grew to the size that it is today. One of the things also about Wendy's is that they also anticipated grilling sometimes, and they would not save any meat from the previous day. So what would they do with it? They came up with the idea of grilling all of the meat that was fresh on that day, and that's where Wendy's chili came from. So that's how he was able to make efficiencies with that. Dave Thomas was a humanitarian. Wendy actually came from his daughter, who was had a learning disability when she was 3, and she would say Wendy because it was like one of the few words that she could actually say. That's not her name, but that's how Wendy's came from. Story going along. I'm sorry, but these things are interesting to me. Wendy's joined with Hardee's in 2011, 2012. A year or two later, they were talking about retiring the name Wendy's and folding everything into Hardee's, and Wendy's erupted in terms of the franchisees. This is where conflict happens in organizations, and it has to resolve itself. Wendy's, the franchisees, was led by Wendy herself, who owns 27 franchises in Ohio, and it was a divorce between Hardee's and Wendy's, and it's one of those divorces where everything went great because Hardee's upped their ante when it came to quality. That's what they learned from Wendy's, and Wendy's upped their ante when it came to packaging and wrapping. And so it was an amicable divorce, and it was successful. Dave Thomas passed away in, I think, 1993. Part of his legacy is that he's given hundreds of millions of dollars to orphanages and all of those. He's known as one of the great humanitarians. He couldn't have done that without the help of Colonel Sanders. Anyway, I'm going on. So now, if you ever get in a dinner conversation of where does Wendy's come from, you got the first dope. So, moving on. However, excuse me, there are reasons not to franchise. If you were to be asked a question, is franchising the best way to go? I mean, the answer is not necessarily. Starbucks expanded rapidly, even though they weren't a franchise, because one of the advantages is quite simply you have greater control as a as an individual corporation. If you control your own assets, than you do with a franchisee. Because that advantage that you have with franchising is expansion. But of course, the other side of that is that expansion can happen too quick. And I think, as I've said before, I think one of the difficulties of Krispy Kreme, I think Krispy Kreme is a great idea once a month. I mean, I don't want to have a donut every day, be 300 pounds. But I like it as a treat. It's very difficult to have treats to become successful franchises because success is having dedicated individuals who do 80% of your business. Behavioral psychology tells us that 20% of our customer base will give us 80% of our profits. And unfortunately with Krispy Kreme, quite simply, it's not an everyday snack. That's one of the difficulties of franchising this way is you don't grow your knowledge sometimes as efficient as you want. Errors can propagate in the system before you have a time to correct them. And this is one of Krispy Kreme's thing. Now there's one in Hickory, of course, the one in Lenore closed. The one here in Boone is now a bank. There are reasons why you don't franchise. Having said that, Starbucks made some really major mistakes. So I teach Starbucks in my marketing strategy class. And Starbucks did not have a chief marketing CMO until 2006. Their point was, well, everybody is a marketer inside of Starbucks, which is, you need to have someone who's directing these things. Anyway, franchising is not the only way. So what are the strategies that you have for franchising? Let me go back to that first slide. Come on, please. Okay, so there are more than one way to franchise. Depending on the particular items that you sell, and you find that there's two different strategies, one generally for complex things and another one generally for fast food. And so we're not going to talk about these things at the moment, but we're going to talk about two types of franchising strategies: product and trade name and business format franchising. So if I were to go over to Mr. Tire and I was looking to buy a set of Michelin Cross Climate 2 like I have right now, it would be more than one franchise, or excuse me, more than one dealership in Boone that I can make that request. And the unique thing about those particular ones is they have their own name. Well, it seems like it kind of works against the structure of franchising, but this is what's known as a product or trade name franchising. Product and trade name franchising is when the franchisor has dealers that sell their product or their product line, can use their trade name, but they don't have the all-encompassing blanket that a business franchise does. So what you generally see is these tend to be products that can be what are described as durable goods. So talking about items such as tires, appliances, those particular items in which individual expertise tends to be something homegrown inside the systems versus business strategies that you pass down. So when I worked for Omni Computer Store in Lafayette, we were a product and trade name franchise of a couple of computer systems, one called Capro, One was CDS, Columbia Data Systems. And what we could say is we were authorized dealers that we could work on those machines, get them fixed, but we had our own individual name, Omni Computer Store. The way that a franchisor makes money this way is they sell the goods directly to the retailer. And the money that they make comes from the payment that the store sends to them. In other words, they do not make any other money necessarily off of any extra accessory goods, although they do carry accessory lines. There is not the level of expertise transferred backwards and forwards. Generally, what you find is at the retail level, they have strong brand names, and there's a synergistic brand strategy between an established dealer who's been there for years and the goods that they sell. If you go to Modern Subaru, the name Modern is the name of the company itself. Modern Subaru, Modern Toyota. Those are individual authorized dealers. When you buy a car from them, they have already bought that from Subaru themselves. So if I buy the goods completely, remember the two functions that I have. The specialty is when I own the goods, I have the ability to set prices. That's the big thing. Michelin cannot tell their dealers, you can sell these goods only at a given level. Michelin basically has to say, this is the suggested retail price. It is very possible within geographic area to have trade wars with other dealers of the same Michelin product. You can either go up or down. I'm taking advantage right now so I bought a Nintendo Switch for my daughter's birthday. And I was thinking about holding out for the Switch 2. My son, who's the other guru, was telling me, it's June 2nd and you don't know how things are going. And I'm not going to spend $80 for Mario Kart. But what the advantage is now is that there are people with huge stocks of the original Switch, the OLED version, where the price right now is crashing. And so my daughter loves Splatoon. So I got a combination Switch Splatoon for around $320. And that's both of them together. And that's because the wholesalers or the sellers of these things have more than they have to deal with, and they're trying to get rid of those before the Switch 2 moves in. And that's the exact example here, is that they've bought the goods from Nintendo, now they got to get rid of the darn thing. And so these are the advantages you have. Also, in an example of a tire dealership and there's a certain amount of expertise that is within those franchises that did not come from the franchisors. There's a homegrown level of quality within the people work there that did not originally come from corporate. And so product trade name franchisers, greater, how should I put it? Greater control of the brand versus the business format franchisers. You sell to the dealers, you wash your hands of it. Now you may require their service department to be able to have a certain certification in the way that they do. We had to, but that's basically as far as it went. So if you ever see a dealership and they have their first name in front, you know what kind it is. You know it's a product or trade name. Man, what's making this thing slow? Anyway, business format strategy is exactly what I've been talking about. Business format strategy, if you were asking you a question, what's the difference? You could just simply say, Business format strategy is where you are basically licensing entire way of doing business. For a franchisor, the reward you get is a continuous flow of ongoing fees. There is no royalty prices in a product or trade name. One of the things that when you get the deliberate loss of identity, what you're trading is, you're basically saying that 9% before I pay anything else goes directly to corporate. And so that's the difference. A franchise is not only all the goods that they sell, but the intellectual property rights of the way that you're doing things. So one of the things that you can process is that you can, one of the things that you can patent is a process as much as anything else. Has anyone ever been to a Ruth Chris Steakhouse? Oh, you have? Where? I'm curious, where?
In Charlotte.
What did you, I'm just pleased, what'd you get?
It was a long time ago, so I think I just got like a fillet.
Okay.
Like for my dad's birthday.
Oh, there you
Yeah.
go. Your dad will love
We
you.
balled out, yeah.
Yeah. Was it good?
It was really good. It was fancy.
Yeah.
Kind of one of those things you only go to like.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's the way they're built. Forgive me, localization. Ruth's Chris Steakhouse started in New Orleans. But one of the things that Ruth Chris Steakhouse does is they fry it at 600 degrees in butter for a certain limited amount of time. And they cook that they sear that steak perfect, make it sure it's so that it's perfectly marbled. Oh man, I'm getting hungry. Anyway, but the process has been patented. So it means that you could not make a steak like that any other, well, you could probably fish around and do it, but if you were doing some of the same things, Ruth could sue you. So that's when I say that this intellectual property rights are one of the things that go along with it. You are authorized to cook in the exact way and usually no other way because you want to ensure quality. So usually what you use is you have a common name or sign. It is the communication, the two-way flow of information between the franchisor and the franchisee. And the promise of continuing technical assistance by the franchisor to the franchisee. Okay, oops, sorry. Now, let me see if they talk about the contracts. Okay, wanted to make sure where they put, okay, here we go. So how do they manage this consistently? It is very tightly covered by the contracting within the legal language itself. Contracts within franchises generally look at a 15-year time span for the initial framing. It covers implicit language about how things were being paid. What are the ways in which there are conflict resolutions? And it is built over years, generally to have clauses that favor the franchisor, but the rights of the franchisee are protected as well. The three things that are mostly covered in contracts are how do you pay, who owns the land, And how do we get out of this without hurting each other? And so, how do you get into a franchise system? The first thing you have are what are called sunk costs. Sunk costs are costs that you do not recover, that before you can start putting one brick up to build your building, you have these prices to pay first. There is first the franchise fee. The franchise fee can either be a barrier of entry or it can be an opening of entry. Large franchises cost much, much more. McDonald's, I think I said $1 million. I think it's like 700,000 to be, if I remember correctly. The first price you pay is that you upfront pay McDonald's $700,000. What that buys you is the right to buy a franchise, and you hold that right within a given geographic area for approximately 10 to 15 years. So that's the upfront fee, the franchise fee. Depending on how much you make that, depends on also how far you're willing to grow your franchise. So as I said before, Subway came out and their franchises fees, when they really wanted to turn it on, sunk to around $14,000. That's incredibly inexpensive. But what it did do is two things, as I said, is it allowed the franchisees to invest in the equipment that they could afford. And the other is that it opened up thousands of little mom and pop places to be able to have a Subway within their particular places. So a Keys and any other convenience store that you might want to consider, as long as there was enough room, as long as they met it, they could compete against the Walmarts. I think I said before, Chick-fil-A, it's $1,000. But for Chick-fil-A, the thing is that they believe investing in the people who are going to own the franchises. So the average Chick-fil-A takes about 4 years to be able to achieve a franchise. They also make very large restrictions. You cannot own more than one Chick-fil-A. You cannot make more than 50% of your yearly income from something other than a Chick-fil-A. Now, with all those restrictions, they are standing in line to become franchisees of Chick-fil-A. It is literally money in the bank. And Chick-fil-A likes to hold their franchises now for people inside their organization who are willing to grow. And so, believe it or not, if you start out at the drive-up window at a Chick-fil-A, you've got a better chance of being able to own one of their franchises than someone with $1 million. Just the way they do business. And so you first have the franchise fee as an upfront fee. You also have the building of the building, because I mean, if McDonald's owns the land, what can you do with the building? So those are the sunk costs. The next is a royalty on sales, and that's a very critical thing. Royalty has a different place on the bottom line than just a margin cent. Royalties by accounting means that it is a first payment before you pay for anything else, before you even pay for the goods that you're selling. And so if I were to make $100,000 in a McDonald's in a month, which is ridiculous because they make about 4.5 million every month. No, excuse me, 2.5 million. Chick-fil-A makes four. Anyway, I'm sorry. You would write a check for $9,000 every month to the McDonald's before you paid the light bill. Now, what if I'm a franchisee, franchisor, and my desire to grow is more important to me than the franchise royalty fee? What I would probably do is I would find some way of giving assistance to the franchisees, waiving those costs even, so that I can find myself in locations where I may not necessarily be. If I'm willing to do investments in depressed areas, especially in urban areas that would use the McDonald's, but may not be able to gain access, then that would be one of the fees that I'd be willing to give up to find good ownership in that area. By the very same opposite, if I'm in a rural location that I think would be able to do sufficient business, if I were found a franchisee, but maybe someone who wouldn't be able to pay the royalty fees, then I would do that as well. The last thing before the royalty fee is its advantages to both the franchisor and franchisee is the tide sales. Every 2 days, I think, if you watch the McDonald's here, a truck rolls up twice a week, I believe, and delivers the orders for that particular McDonald's of breakfast burritos, of all of the particular things, the sausages, all of the necessaries that were ordered to that particular store comes in and rolls in. This is also where the economies of scale work in. The franchisees buys their goods solely from corporate. There are advantages into this because the consistency of quality means that no one purchase is going to be better or less than another. Now, back in the 70s, McDonald's actually allowed local bakeries to make their particular buns, and that's one of the ways that they shared profits, but they don't do that anymore. One of their secret recipes, by the way, at McDonald's is that they doubled the amount of sugar in their buns. It's how the kids came back again and again and again, but they don't do that anymore. Well, don't do local bakeries. What they did find is quite simply is that once again, the consistency mattered more. Tide sales clauses are actually a good thing because there is no way that a local franchisee could be able to purchase those goods at as low a price as they could from corporate. And of course, the other way around goes is that corporate constantly makes money on those tide sales. And so there is advantages in doing it this way. As I've said, the business or trade name franchises, it's all in selling the goods and wash their hands. So we talked about the fees. The real estate, the leasing of the land, is one of the ways that franchisees can grow without having to become real estate dealers. Because if they're going to buy intellectual rights from a franchisor, they're probably not good at picking real estate either. So the franchisor, like a McDonald's, buys the land, they leases the land to the franchisee buys the building, And the franchisor gets the right of termination. It doesn't mean everything's all in one direction, because the franchisor also can help out the franchisee and give them a break that normal leasing wouldn't necessarily get. If they were to terminate, they are required to pay for the building. And that is also part of the contract. And termination is the last thing on the planet that they want to do. Want their people to grow. And so these are the things that you legally do to protect your rights, but it's not something you're going to fall in love with. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to finish the rest of this on Thursday. I think I've given a lot of information all at one time. And so we have a few slides here to talk about with contracts and company store strategies. We'll finish that up. We will talk about the omni-channel on Thursday and the future in marketing channels, and that'll get you ready for the test on the weekend. Okay, go enjoy the beautiful spring weather. I'll see you later.